want to jump into this or start with this idea of two minds. And I'm a restorer. I've not been trained as a violin maker. I started with making fretted instruments, but I played cello. And so when I really focused on violin family instruments, I went right into restoration work. And of course, this is a very long time ago. And throughout my career, I've kind of just observed my colleagues, and I've always had this sense that people frequently gravitate either towards making or repair and restoration work, which is not to say that, you have to do one or the other. Actually, many of us do some of both. But it did get me thinking a whole lot about, well, what is the mindset that really, or is there a mindset that is particularly suitable for repairing and restoration work as opposed to a mindset that is more about making? And to simplify this idea, I've broken it down into this idea that my colleagues who are makers really work primarily with design issues and choices around designs and models and forms. And we share a lot of things in common, but as a restorer, there's this overlay of what I think of as a different kind of accountability, really, because as restorers, we're working with something that is created by someone else. And we are then responsible for doing the repair work or doing the restoration work. And on top of that, we are also responsible, obviously, to our clients. We might have a historical reference that we're responsible to. So that notion of accountability is really heightened in what I call the sensibility or the restorer's mind. And I'm curious about pursuing this idea. I do have a blog, and it's you can find it at restorersmind.com. Follows up on some of these ideas. So that's what restorer's mind means to me. What is it that differentiates us from our maker friends, or what differentiates the mindset that we need to get into to do restoration work, as opposed to the mindset we might have to get into to do creative making work? Yes, you can laugh here. This is it's going to get serious after this. But a restoration to me is always a party of four or more, because who's involved? Well, my client is obviously involved, and my client is probably a player, although sometimes I do work for dealers and they're not actually playing the instruments, but hypothetically, there's always a player behind the repair or the restoration work. So Mr. Bowie here up on the left is standing in for my player client, of course, why not? Mr. Strad on the upper right is the maker of the instrument. Sometimes this is not so crucial. Sometimes the maker's unknown. Sometimes it's a school of making that I feel responsible to as a repairer, restorer. I would sure love to see more of Strad's work on my bench, but that happens rarely. But I also might feel, well, in this party of people that I feel are affecting the work that I'm doing on my bench is also, I would include past repairers and restorers. And although I don't necessarily feel accountable to them, certainly their work, the work that has preceded my own work, affects the decisions that I make, for better or worse sometimes. So that's actually quite a lot of players there that land on my workbench with any particular project. And I might add that not all of these players are invited, but they are there nonetheless. So let's explore this question about what restoration is, because I do find that my clients and the world at large toss around words like repair and restoration pretty inconsistently and without a lot of thought. I've had potential clients call and tell me that they've, had their grandpa's fiddle and they just had it restored at the local music shop. And basically that means to them that they had it dusted off and had the strings put back on. So I went looking for a way to describe restoration work or to define it as opposed to repair work, because my sense is that they are different. And if my tech person can help me out here, I've got a banner on the right, and I can't read what's in the Mr. John Dilworth's.
Oh, sure. Sorry, that's a window that maybe you can drag out of the way. It's not something that we're seeing live.
Oh, very good. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so is there a difference between restoration and repair work? Is restoration just, bigger bucks and fancier clamps? Is it a longer stay in the workshop? What is it? And is it different from repair work? Because you can do repair work in a rental shop, but you're probably not doing restoration work in a rental shop. For me personally, I do a lot of repair work and I do quite a bit of restoration work. And of course, the restoration work is what I prefer or care about most, but in the reality of my life, it's really a mix. So on the left here is a project of mine in the past couple of years where literally somebody fell on it and, smashed the back and the upper left rib, the treble rib. And I always felt like this was really different from some of the restoration work that I do because it was really about repairing an immediate damage. So I'm going to refer to John Dilworth's quote here, and he's really a wonderful repair restorer in England. And this is a quote that I pulled out of that massive I have to get the name of it, the Conservation of Violin books that the American Federation put out, 3-volume set. And John Dilworth says that repair involves dealing with various misfortunes that occur one by one, but restoration entails the careful elimination of accumulated damage and deterioration in order to bring the instrument back to its best possible condition with regard to structure, aesthetics, and tone. And I find that really eloquently put. And now to go back to my project here with the smashed ribs, that was really about pinpointing the 5 minutes before the misfortune happened and trying to return the instrument back to that state of health. It really wasn't about dealing with deterioration or accumulated damage. It was remedying an injury. So that's, in my view, even though this was a huge project, I would consider that a repair. And also the word I like best in John's quote here is when he says to bring the instrument back to its best possible condition. And best possible does not mean perfect. It's just the best possible condition. Okay, so restoration is part of a continuum. And remember, we were talking about the difference between repair and restoration. Well, restoration being a process that you attempt to eliminate deterioration. Here's another project that I did a while ago, which was, I must be hitting something. Sorry about that. This was a Jakob Steiner violin, and in fact, this really had been this was a restoration project because the instrument was terribly deteriorated. And so the work involved really dealing with that, not an injury so much as that accumulated deterioration over time. And again, the concept I'm getting at here is that really there's so much of our work as restorers is about judgment calls. It's about getting into the ethics of it. Every choice, every decision is really a judgment call. How deeply do I clean something? What kind of solvents do I use? How do I preserve as much of the original as possible? How do I leave as much as I can undisturbed? And so getting into ethical principles and practices now, here's this is a huge topic and I could talk about this all week. So to be concise and narrow it down and hopefully be done in 5 or 10 minutes. Basic principles of restoration work are that we do respect the original and we do do everything we can to preserve it. But our ultimate goal, of course, is to put a tool back into the hands of musicians. So we're also trying to achieve that best possible condition, but also deal with tonal issues, aesthetic issues, and then structural health. So we use our least invasive procedures. If there's a way to do something more simply and less invasively, then that is really probably the best choice. We apply the principle of reversibility, which needs some clarification because really, once you go in there, there's no going back. None of our work is really and truly reversible. But as an idea, I think it's a very useful thing to keep in mind. And with that idea in mind, the procedures that we choose to employ, we want to think really about the next 50, 100 years. And when someone has to go in there and redo that work, because everything deteriorates over time, we want to leave enough material or be able to really facilitate the next person's restoration work, which in a sense brings yet another, maybe a fifth or a sixth person into that party of considerations that I was talking about. So not only are we affected by restorers of the past and the decisions that we're making in the immediate sense, but we also should be thinking about who's going to come in behind us. And I'm adding this, avoiding heroics and excesses. I think there was a period of time when shops were much more inclined to go in and do a really heroic repair. And many years later now, we're rethinking decisions like that and starting to think more conservatively about how to do a less invasive kind of repair for many things. Also, I would say being prepared to expect a less than perfect outcome is really important because, we're not responsible for the fact that age happens and deterioration happens and injuries happen. There's no way to really make those things not happen. So to accept a certain degree of imperfection in our work enables us to work to the best of our ability and bring things to that best condition without, suffering a sense of failure, but also without, unfortunately, doing more damage by trying to chase that perfect repair. So in terms of practices, a big project like this certainly would require taking notes and measurements, documenting the process. There are some times that we have to do something we wish we didn't have to do, but keeping some kind of a track of that can be useful. Choosing appropriate materials, of course, matching materials is important, but materials that can be reversed, can be retreated, and then also applying tasteful aesthetics rather than hiding things. We like to go in and do a restoration and kind of come out and feel like we've not left a lot of tracks, although we always leave tracks. I mean, sometimes I open instruments and I get a sense of who's actually done the repair or the previous repair or where that instrument might have been historically speaking. So we never really go in and leave without some kind of trace, but we do want to minimize that. And this notion of aesthetics, because of course, a lot of what we end up doing is certainly attends to the health of the instrument, but in the end, we want it to look good and feel healthy and come across as healthy and make somebody really happy when you put it back in their hands. And of course, that I'm going to talk a little bit about retouching in just a minute. But to backtrack here a little bit, there are areas that we, in restoration and repair work, we do often go wrong. It's easy to go wrong. And one is cleaning and polishing. It's very easy to get enthusiastic about cleaning up an instrument, but there are points at which we really don't want to disturb some of the patina that's happened over time. We certainly don't want to disturb the surface texture of the varnish itself. So just as a word of caution, I would say that, these two areas were cleaning and polishing, and also the potential for removing too much wood. Those are two areas that we can, tend to overdo things. And I think that's been proven historically, looking at past restoration work as well. And I included these two pictures because this is a process that I learned at Oberlin many years ago. And I was delighted to learn it because it's a way to restore or, re-solidify the edges of an instrument that have been, the top edges that have been really badly ripped out. And it used to be many years ago in some of the larger shops that we would just do a half edge, which removes a lot of original wood. And so to have this option of just splicing in splinters and small shavings to build up an edge is, in my mind, very much more conservative, in line with the ethics of not taking too much wood, leaving as much of the original as possible. And of course, the other thing where we go wrong is underestimating the time it takes to do careful work. And, I can hear the international groan from here because we all do it. But the more valuable the instrument, the more accountability that's packed into the repair job. Really, the slower we have to work, the more carefully we have to work. And that's always hard to calculate as you move into working on better and better instruments. Okay, now I can talk about retouching. This is the aesthetic part of doing a restoration. Of course, it involves primarily the varnish, but also, of course, replacement wood when you do have to introduce new wood. And it's an absolutely essential part of the restoration. It's a difficult part of the restoration. But I have some ethical questions about, or ethical points to interject here as well. And that's that one of the tools that we use in restoration work is a UV light, like ultraviolet light. And if you look at an instrument under UV light, you see there's a lot of information that's revealed. the UV light will or the varnish will fluoresce differently, depending on whether it's original varnish or retouching varnish, or perhaps some kind of later patina, or there's just a lot of information that's revealed by UV light. And I was at a conference a while ago, a few years ago, when the presenters were really getting enthusiastic about replicating original Cremonese varnishes replicating with retouching varnish the way an old Cremonese varnish fluoresces under UV light. And to me, this is a point where we walk this line of deception in our repair, restoration, and particularly retouching work. Because in my mind, I really want to, as much as I want something to look beautifully aesthetic, beautifully presented, I also want my repair, and I want to see other repairs visible or detectable, even if it takes a little professional eye. So, is there an ethical line between tasteful blending of repair work or pursuing a truly hidden repair? And I would say, yeah, there is. So that continuum, that time continuum of where does a restorer sit on that continuum between the maker and past restorers and the present and then possibly future restorers. I pull out this instrument periodically because I so love it. And it's a 19th century French instrument that was constructed in Paris. It was constructed out of wood that was harvested from a larger instrument that had been constructed in the late 1600s. And this is what I'm talking about on the far right, how UV light shows us so much of the story of an instrument that, to me, it's unethical, really, to try to mess with that story. And I love this instrument because, to me, the time continuum is really embraced here. The UV light exposes both the varnish from the instrument in 1697 and also the 19th century overlaid varnish when it was reconstructed into the small viola. And on the left, you have the two different labels in the same instrument that refer both to the newer construction and the old instrument. And so here's a beautiful example of a grand intervention, in a sense, the instrument being recreated, and yet the historical track is still there. So changing ideas about restoration, yeah, I think we're getting more and more serious about conserving what we have. And this came to mind. My good friend, Jerry Lynn, who's a wonderful friend and colleague, is doing some work with 3D scanning and CNC milling. And so I leaned on him because I've not done this kind of work before, but I can see where it's incredibly useful. Here he's taken an upper block from an instrument and put through his process and created a repair to a upper block and a violin that, 20 years ago, we might have just thrown in the trash. So this, we still are changing ideas in restoration, absolutely. New technologies, absolutely. All really, really important work. And I hope that we will all keep thinking very deeply about it. So that's it. If there's time for a couple questions, I'd be happy to.
There is time. There is time for a question, and there is one question. But first of all, Stacey, thank you very much. That was an excellent talk. I truly enjoyed it. Looks like the audience did. So the question is from Bridget. It says, I'd love to hear about the tipping point on older instruments. When do you or your clients decide it's time for restoration?
Wow. Yeah, that's a good question. because timing is, I think, one of those serious considerations. And there, of course, there is no tipping point. There might be a tipping curve. Usually, if my client is looking at a serious restoration, they've probably been seeing the signs for a long time. So sometimes it's a question of timing, resources, and when can the instrument be tied up in a repair. It also depends, obviously, on the value of the instrument and how suitable a temporary repair would be in the meantime. If I have a new crack on an instrument, again, this is all judgment calls. It's all about judgment calls. Maybe it's the time to chase after that crack. If it's fresh, then it obviously needs to be done and glued really well and soon, because that's your best shot at a good repair. If it's an old crack, maybe we nurse it along, keep it glued tight, whatever. And then eventually when it is time for that big repair, that big restoration work, then there's going to be a whole grocery list of things to attend to at the same time. So tipping point, it's a discussion between you and your client. And with that idea of, least invasive and pick your timing.
Thank you very much, Stacey.
Sure.
This was truly brilliant. I loved it.